Welcome back to Timo's Dinky Detailing. Today I'm going to be looking at some paint from the dollar store. I'm having trouble with my usual supplier of paints because of lockdowns, and I keep seeing this paint in the dollar store, and it's very cheap. It's $1 a bottle, so I thought, why don't I give it a try? So here's the paint. This is paint that's it's designed for children or something. The paint in the craft section. And so I picked up a bottle. It costs $1, and it's 4 ounces. It's made in USA. It's made in Kentucky. So I thought, okay, well, this can't be half bad. So it's a little bit thick. So I don't have anything fancy, so I got me some tap water, not even distilled water. And it doesn't mix up that well using a stick. So I'm not happy with the way it's mixing. So I've got my paint mixer, which is actually it's a drink frother, where I took the string off of it because I get this for $10. You can buy a nice Tamiya paint mixer, or anyway, you can buy a paint mixer for $40 or $50. This does the same thing. I took the spring off of it, but it did still foam it up a fair bit. But then I'm thinking, when I put it into the airbrush, the bubbles will go to the top, and I'm going to be painting with the paint that doesn't have the bubbles in it. So here I'm putting it into the airbrush, and you can see I've got a plastic knife. Everybody uses a plastic spoon. I don't have any. I've got a bunch of knives, so I'm gonna paint the knife. Now, half of this knife, this half hasn't been primed. This half has. It's hard to see, but I want to compare just on plastic and on the primed surface. So I'm going with a very light coat. I've watched videos, and they say that with the acrylic paints, you need to start with a very, very light coat before you start building it up. So I've gone with a very thin. You can hardly see it. You can see it when there's a shadow over it that it's turning green. So that's the plastic side, and this is the primed side. Now, I don't have any white fine primer. I want to get some, but my hobby shop never has it in stock. Hasn't had it in stock for 4 months. So I'll get some white when they get some in. And in the meantime, I'm dealing with gray primer, so it's a little bit harder getting the color onto the paint, well, especially if you're using a light color. And this is like a fluorescent green that I picked up. So I'm taking my time doing this and putting on very light layers, and then I'm going to have to open it up a little bit, and here we go. Paint it on a little bit thicker. So you can start to see some color get on there. There's more color than you can see. You can see it in the shadow, but it is starting to cover it, and I'm not having any trouble. It's not coming out in globs. It's not clogging the airbrush. It's working just fine. And we're talking about tap water. I know there's special thinners for the acrylic paints, and I might get some of those, because I'm sure that's not as expensive as the paint, but it might make this paint better. But this is a really critical test, because here in Toronto we have pretty hard water, and a lot of people complain about it, and they get water softeners to improve the quality of the water. So I could have done this with distilled water I can get from a bottle, and it costs $1.50 for a 4-liter bottle of distilled water. So that's not going to bring up the price of this at all. So it's looking pretty good on both sides, the plain unprimed plastic side, and the paint is still wet here. So I just pulled it up close to the camera and show the reflection that I got a nice wet coat on there. Now this paint, I have to tell you, is not a gloss paint. So I put it under a lamp and the plastic bent, but it did dry the paint quickly because this is a really super quickie test I decided to do. I'm working on another project and I thought I would test this paint out. So it made a pretty decent coat, and here is the unprimed side, and with my thumbnail I can scratch it a little bit. This is the primed side. I cannot scratch it with my thumbnail. So I'm going to try and see how it handles being taped up. So I'm using Contractor 2020 Scotch brand tape, which is really good quality tape, and it's very sticky. I mean, compared with other masking tapes. And if I was using a Tamiya masking tape or one of these green masking tapes or blue masking tapes, you wouldn't expect it to pull anything up, but this is like the hardest test. So I'm gonna pull it up like I would on a model, pull it with the tweezers, and that's on the primed side. This is on the side with the scratch. I'm kind of out of the frame. It pulled up, well, you can see on the tape, it pulled up a little bit more where the scratch was, so it had already started to pull up. Normally I wouldn't paint anything straight onto a surface. I always prime everything before I use paint, so that's not a big issue for me. So now, wasn't very well framed in the camera, so let's try the test again, and this time not over top of where I had already scratched the paint. So I'm rubbing it down with my fingernail, and which is what you would do when you're painting, because you don't want the paint to run under there. And I have a problem with my paints. I'm usually using the Mr. Hobby aqueous paints, and if I put tape on it, I'm just pulling the paint up. This is not pulling up with that very harsh masking tape. So it's passed that test with flying colors. Now I'm going to cover it with the Mr. Hobby Super Clear, because it's a matte finish. It's not a glossy paint, but I don't care, because in the end I'm going to spray this clear coat on it and make it as glossy as I want. So it goes on, doesn't cause the paint to run, and when it's done, it looks beautiful. It's a nice glossy finish. That was one coat. Normally I would put 2 coats of the Mr. Super Clear, and it would be like super glossy. So there you go, the Crafters acrylic paint. Here's some AK paint that I got from my son's friend. This AK paint bottle is 17 milliliters, which comes out to just over half an ounce. The Deco Art Crafters acrylic is 4 ounces, and it costs $1, which comes out to about 30 times cheaper than the AK. I don't see any significant difference in these two paints. I've got 2 projects on the go. One is just in editing, and the other is it's halfway through. But the next project, I'm going to try doing the entire project using this dollar store paint and see how it comes out. So I hope this episode was interesting for you. It's interesting for me. And in the meantime, we'll see you next time on Timo's Dinky Detailing. Be seeing you.